This is Derrick Bros with the Conscious Resistance. Today, I am very excited to bring to you my next guest. I'd like for you to welcome to the show San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Welcome to the show, Richard. How are you doing?
Thanks, Derrick. Feeling great today, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today about this very important topic. It's something that I continue to follow, and it's something that you've dedicated, your entire life to. So I want to give the audience a chance to know about yourself and the work you're doing and how they can get involved. So first of all, before we get into the evidence of what we're talking about, let everybody know a bit about yourself and how you got into the work of 9/11 Truth.
Well, I'm an architect of about 26 years, and I have been working on large buildings, most recently a $400 million project in Las Vegas with about 1,200 tons of steel framing, a mixed-use project with mid-rise office space, lots of retail and parking garage. But for the last 4 years, I've been full-time letting the American public and architects and engineers know about the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11, because we have not been told the truth. About 7 years ago, 8 years now, I heard on the radio a researcher named David Ray Griffin on the show Guns and Butter, which Bonnie Faulkner has on Berkeley's KPFA. I could not believe what I was hearing at first. He's talking about the evidence of explosions at the World Trade Center towers. He's talking about extremely hot temperatures that can't be accounted for by fires or jet fuel, normal office fires or jet fuel. He's talking about the destruction of a 3rd skyscraper that I knew nothing about on 9/11. And so, on 9/11, I was just in shock watching these buildings come down in the morning on TV. I didn't know what to think. We had never seen any kind of a destruction like we saw at the Twin Towers. And so we're in a state of shock. I mean, I just remember feeling, oh my God, and with no frame of reference with which to judge this level of destruction and this type of destruction, demolition as it turns out to be. I just accepted the official story, hook, line, and sinker. In fact, I went on to support the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, being a Reagan Republican at the time. I'm not sure what I am now. But I realized that I looked further into this evidence. In fact, I think it was the next day, David Ray Griffin was speaking in Oakland to a crowd of 600 people. And I went, and they were sold out. And so I had to go home and listen to the simulcast or podcast on the radio at home, and I was just floored. I had to find out if this is true. So I did a lot of research, and I said, oh my God, architects and engineers need to know about all this evidence that they're not getting from the government. They're not getting from the corporate media. And so I put together Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and we had our first architect and engineer for 9/11 Truth. That was me. And so since then, we've now got 2,100 architects and engineers putting their reputations on the line, demanding a real investigation of what happened based on the evidence, which is overwhelmingly convincing, as we'll see today, for the hypothesis of explosive demolition. And so since then, we have educated congressmen, we've given them both of our DVDs, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, The Architecture of Destruction, and 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, which has 43 technical experts citing the evidence in their various fields, including high-rise architecture, structural engineering, chemical engineering, physics, controlled demolition experts, etc., just laying this evidence out in very matter of fact, and it's pretty overwhelming. In fact, we've given this presentation now to 300 groups around the world, including groups ranging from as little as 50 to 3,000 people in attendance.
Wow, that's really powerful, Richard. I'm excited to hear that story. Every time you tell it, I'm reminded of the work of David Ray Griffin and others who have spent hours and hours digging through the mountains of evidence that does contradict different aspects of the attacks of September 11, 2001, and your work dealing specifically with the architecture and with the physics of the free fall of those buildings. So let's get into the evidence itself. Let's dissect what evidence has been compiled over the past 12 years.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary too, and I like to start with the third tower that collapsed on 9/11 because most people don't even know about it, like myself. In fact, 80% of architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. This is World Trade Center Building 7, which suffered a few fires as a result of some of the debris that hit it when the towers went down earlier that morning. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, says that these fires were, and the debris itself, and diesel, which was in the third tower also, did not have a significant effect on the collapse of this building. It was normal office fires that brought this building down at 5:20 in the afternoon. A 47-story skyscraper, taller than most of the buildings in all of the buildings in most of our states. So 5:20 in the afternoon, after some rumbling, the whole thing starts from top to bottom, suddenly, symmetrically, straight down almost, into its footprint, just about, in under 7 seconds. I mean, this is at free fall acceleration for a third of its fall. It's falling as fast as this pen. 3, 2, 1. That's how fast it falls. So that's because, and can only be because, there is absolutely no resistance from any of the 80 columns on each of at least 8 floors, because that's the distance over which this building fell at free fall, which is a third of its fall. So we have some major explaining to do by NIST, which is the reason we recently wrote a letter to the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce. William Pepper, attorney, drafted this letter citing that NIST committed, well, in effect, they committed fraud by omitting some key structural elements in their analysis, which they used to support their hypothesis of destruction by thermal expansion due to normal office fires. So their theory is that the major fires on floor 12, which, by the way, were out about an hour prior to the collapse of this building, so they could not have been expanding those beams at that time. But they say those beams expanded, pushing a girder off of its seat on this particular column 79. which then caused the floor to fall and onto the next floor, onto the next one for 9 floors, and then this column 79 then buckles, and that causes instability which travels laterally through the vertically through the building, and then laterally through the rest of the interior of the building, all the time not telegraphing any of this destruction to the exterior perimeter structure, which is ludicrous, because we would have seen massive deformation on the outside of this building. But the 7 or so videos that we have show virtually no deformation on the exterior of this building prior to its 7-second collapse. So the theory makes no sense from beginning to end, nor does their justification of it by their computer animations, which show up to 400 structural steel connections failing inside this building per second. Imagine that, 400 structural steel connections failing per second over the course of about 20 seconds, according to their theory. Overall, it's ludicrous. It's like taking a fire hose to a sandcastle. That's the degree of destruction in their computer models, which bears no resemblance whatsoever to the video, because their computer animations begin to fall sideways, which is why they stop it after 2 seconds. They will not even show us what happens after 2 seconds in their video animations, and their animations show massive warping in their perimeter structural system, which does not happen, as I mentioned, in the video. So we have serious trouble just alone with the NIST support for their own hypothesis.
So you also have evidence for nanothermite, for molten metal. Can you get into some of that?
Yeah, well, all we have to do is look at the pile, which, by the way, is a 4-story pile centered in the middle of this building. It looks exactly like the result of a controlled demolition, and of course the whole thing, beginning to end, looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and yet NIST went straight for and only to the hypothesis of destruction by normal office fires, even though no skyscraper in history prior to 9/11 has ever collapsed due to normal office fires or any kind of fires. And yet every skyscraper that's come down has been due to controlled demolition, and it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. So this is another evidence of more evidence of fraud. But the FEMA report that came out in May 2002 tells it even more clearly with the scientific forensic evidence, because prior to NIST taking over this investigation in 2002, FEMA had documented in their Appendix C the hot temperature corrosion of the steel. The ends of the beams, says the fire protection engineer Dr. Jonathan Barnett, were partially evaporated. That requires temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees. Normal office fires are, and especially in this building, which are very small and scattered and full of dark black smoke indicating oxygen starved, maybe 600 degrees, maybe 1,000 degrees. 4,000 degree temperatures required to evaporate steel, and pools of molten iron, molten steel as they describe it, molten iron as further tests show, pools of this material requiring 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, we're talking about here, to melt that. The firemen said it was flowing like lava, the steel, down the channel rails of these beams and columns. This is incredible. They'd never seen this kind of hot temperature, and of course these temperatures persisted for months and are documented by Bechtel as being over 2,800 degrees. In fact, the dust that is pulverized concrete from all three towers, a third of it is pulverized concrete, but what's also in that dust is small, billions and billions of small, previously molten iron microspheres, the diameter of a human hair. This, in fact, they're so ubiquitous in all the samples that they say it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these unexplained, previously molten iron microspheres that have the residue in them, in addition of elemental iron, which we're not talking about steel from the beams here. It has aluminum and other ingredients which clearly show that it is the residue of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So here we have in World Trade Center 7, in all the World Trade Center dust, the evidence of the use of thermite incendiaries. Now, thermite incendiaries are not used normally in controlled demolitions. So let's talk about that for a moment. Normally, they use C4 or RDX, high-energy explosives, which are quite efficient at cutting through steel, but produce very loud bangs and bright flashes. So that would be an obvious signature to avoid in a deceptive controlled demolition. Deceptive because we're told this is destruction by normal office fires due indirectly in the case of World Trade Center 7 to the jet plane impacts, and directly in the case of the Twin Towers. So there are cutter charges, though, that are patented that use thermite, that eject molten iron, the byproduct of thermite, in milliseconds through the structural steel. And so we certainly want an investigation, and that's what the 2,100 architects and engineers that I represent are calling for, of the use of thermite incendiaries. In fact, in the Twin Towers, we have even more evidence because molten iron is pouring out of the side of the tower, out about the point where the jet planes impacted, interestingly enough. But it's not aluminum. It's not melted airplane like they speculate. Molten aluminum looks silvery. So we're talking about, and this material is shown to rust heavily, and it's pulled up. These meteorites of previously molten iron are pulled up out of the debris. But more interestingly, throughout the World Trade Center dust, an independent team of scientists finds in all 4 independently collected samples curious small red-gray chips. They're red on one side, gray on the other, about a 1/16 of an inch long. In all the samples, there's tons of this material throughout all the World Trade Center dust. But this is elemental iron particles and aluminum particles, the ingredients of thermite, found at the extremely small scale, nano-sized particles of aluminum and iron oxide embedded in an organic compound of oxygen, silica, and carbon. When they look into it with the electron microscope, they can see all of this. Now, this is extremely sophisticated material engineered from the atomic scale up. This is not ground down powders of aluminum and iron oxide, which, by the way, are found in the perfect percentage to become thermite, 3/4 iron oxide, 1/4 aluminum. So this is all peer-reviewed documented in a peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, and it stands uncontested with any other published peer-reviewed paper. So that's the way one might challenge somebody else's conspiracy theory, is to publish your own document challenging the results and analysis. But nothing's been published. So it's an indictment against the official story. All of this evidence is, and it could put a whole lot of people away for a long time for treason and mass murder.
Yes, we're catching up with Richard Gage right now. Richard, could you name the journal that the paper was published in one more time?
Yes, that's the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal.
Thank you very much. And another question I had is it possible, is there any other source that could be, that could account for these various elements in the dust?
Well,
building materials, anything such as that?
Nanothermite incendiaries cannot be accounted for. They're not found in the building. While there's iron inside steel columns, it's an alloy. It's not, you can't get elemental iron out of that in pools of molten iron and droplets. The droplets themselves are indicative of an explosive event aerosolizing molten iron. So the molten iron has to be in the building during the explosive aerosolizing event. No, there's no other accounting for these materials. In fact, in World Trade Center 7, the FEMA team documents very carefully the hot sulfur corrosion attack of the steel in addition to liquid molten iron. There's no accounting, though, for where the sulfur might have come from. Sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. So, no, there is no accounting for these materials, which is why NIST does not speculate as to, presumably, as to where they might have come from.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And so you've listed several different pieces of evidence here dealing particularly with World Trade Center 7. Is the evidence still around? Is it stored away? What happened to the evidence after 9/11? You know, what's keeping us from being able to bring this evidence to the public?
Well, there is nothing keeping us from bringing it to the public. It's in our DVD on our website, which is ae911truth.org, ae911truth.org, and so what we're trying to do is bring it to the media, and there's an absolute incredible resistance. They will not report this story in large measure, with very few exceptions, such as Geraldo showed Building 7 coming down on Fox News, of all places, also showing the family member, Bob McIlvaine, who's demanding a real investigation based on the evidence for explosives in the murder of his son, and one of our engineers at AE911 Truth, Tony Zambodi, who does an excellent job on that show documenting the free fall of Building 7. Other than that, and a few alternative media sources reporting on those sources, there's been a complete censorship. And so we ask ourselves, well, why would that be? Why wouldn't the liberal media report the story? Well, if you look at the ownership of the media, it's been found by those who research these things that 90% of the media, and I would suggest the alternative media also, is owned and controlled by the same people on their boards of directors who sit on the corporations in the industries, including the banking industry, the oil industry, the arms industry, the insurance industry, all of whom, curiously, profited enormously from 9/11. So these things have to be looked into too, as well as in the general public. There is a strong reluctance to face the issues of 9/11. We were all in a lot of pain, put in a state of cognitive dissonance with competing realities that don't make sense with our worldview, and terrorists and explosives and getting different stories and just not being able to make sense out of it with all the disinformation put out, interestingly enough, by government sources as well. So none of us want to go back to that painful moment, and we're not even capable, some of us, of evaluating rationally the information when we are put in front of it. We will make emotional decisions relative to that scientific, objective, forensic data, and so we justify our own worldview, because 9/11, or the truth about it, challenges our worldview to our core, and that creates incredible fear. And before we're even aware of that fear, we tend to avoid it, and that's one of our main problems as well. But regarding the destruction of evidence, we need to look at that too, because the evidence, in fact, 98% of the steel from the two Twin Towers and Building 7 was carted away, starting within weeks, 2 weeks after 9/11, to China for recycling. This is the illegal destruction of evidence.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was remembering when looking back to 9/11 research, is that the problem with trying to get more evidence, and I imagine there would have been more if it hadn't been shipped away, is that very fact that it's not there anymore, and the bits and pieces, the dust that researchers such as yourself and Dr. Stephen Jones have gone and done the research and done the testing and found these different elements. It's important to know that. And you also mentioned Geraldo a moment ago, and the showing Building 7 collapse before it happened. Is there any other evidence of foreknowledge?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, how if no skyscraper has ever collapsed due to fires in the history of skyscrapers, how was Mayor Giuliani forewarned about the destruction, about the collapse of the Twin Towers before they collapsed, and got his people out of the headquarters they were situated in, but never told the firefighters to evacuate? And how was the BBC able to announce the collapse of World Trade Center 7, which just had a few small scattered fires, 20 minutes before it ever happened? Why were the police telling people that the building is about to blow up sometime in the afternoon of 9/11? This is all documented in our DVD, by the way, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. They're actually saying flame and debris are going to be coming down. The building's going to blow up. It's pretty amazing. In fact, CNN announced the collapse of Building 7 actually at 11:07 that morning. Somebody said a 50-story building went down. It was a gentleman named Aaron on CNN. Said a firefighter went by announcing this. Well, which of course there's no other 50-story building that went down. They're talking about Building 7, which didn't go down until later at 5:20 in the afternoon. Had the building gone down at that time, by the way, it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud created when the Twin Towers went down about 15 minutes prior to that. So many researchers speculate that Building 7 was supposed to go down at that time, and that that's the reason for all the confusion and the foreknowledge about its having gone down or it's about to come down, because perhaps it was a dud, if you will, and somebody was trying to get it fixed up and get it to come down later.
Wow, yeah, very powerful stuff. So you've mentioned a lot about World Trade Center 7 because obviously of those people who are aware, who have taken the time, as you said, it's painful to look back and reflect on that day and really think about where you were and how much the world has changed since then. But for those who have looked back, the focus has largely been on World Trade Center 7 because many people are unaware of the building. But what type of evidence exists for the Twin Towers themselves?
Oh, yeah. In addition to the scientific chemical forensic evidence that we highlighted just now, just looking at the videos of the building reveals extraordinary evidence for the explosive demolition of these buildings. In contrast to Building 7, which is obviously a classic implosion, the Twin Towers, well, actually, the first 4 seconds of the North Tower's collapse is just that, a classic implosion from the point of the jet plane impacts above. That 12-story block, we're told, drove the rest of the building down to the ground due to structural weakening by the fires at the point of jet plane impact. But that's not what we see at all. What we see is this portion of the building telescoping down on itself. It comes down in 4 seconds. It's completely shattered with bands of explosions described by the firefighters who are on the oral histories. Their oral recordings document 118 firefighters talking about all this experience of explosions, including hearing explosions, seeing flashes of light. And then what happens is the building comes down and in a telescoping manner, just like Building 7 for the first 4 seconds. After that, additional bands of explosions with lateral force are hurling 4-ton perimeter structural steel sections laterally at 60 miles an hour, all directions. This is an incredible evidence of explosive force. And then these sections are trailing thick white smoke clouds, most of them, which is evidence in and of itself of the ends of these structural steel sections having been severed due to extremely high heat. And then we have explosions going off below this zone of destruction, producing a massive mushroom cloud of extremely hot pyroclastic-like smoke clouds indicating extreme heat from chemical reactions in incendiaries, the destruction by heat. And then, but these explosions below are going off 20, 40, 60 stories down below and emerging from the building at speeds of 200 feet per second. These are explosively propelled speeds. And then the whole thing comes down 110 stories in a pile. How high? Maybe 2 stories, 3 stories high. 110-story steel frame building, if it was going to pancake collapse, we should have seen a pile of rubble 30, 40 stories tall And we should have seen stacks of pancakes or concrete floors, 110 of them, each of them an acre in size, certainly broken up, but we would have seen massive stacks of these floors, including the 20 gauge or 22 gauge fluted metal decking. Again, 220 acres of it in total. It's mostly all missing, along with the concrete, which has been pulverized, along with 10,000 steel file cabinets and desks and chairs and office furniture and computers completely pulverized, and the bones of people completely pulverized. In fact, 700 bone fragments, a half an inch long, found on top of the skyscraper across the street from the South Tower and documented in the newspaper. Well, how did they get so small, and what are they doing way over there? They didn't come from the airplanes that hit the North or South Tower. That's shown to be completely implausible by the geometries involved. So we need some real explanations about explosions for which there's real evidence.
I was just saying that I definitely see the evidence for explosion, the lateral ejections, everything you just went over, and I think that the listeners should and the viewers should check out a copy of Experts Speak Out, because I think that's the most comprehensive effort that you guys have put out thus far, explaining various experts looking through their fields and on what happened that day and how that doesn't match with the official story. And we're really just kind of going through these point by point, but there's much more for those who want to dig deeper and to take the time to really look into the evidence so that you can spread further, because as Richard has said, there's a heavy resistance from the media to cover these type of topics, and to even ask the questions, it's normally laughed off of. And so we can see that there seems to be some level of complicity with the media and whoever is truly behind these attacks, whoever had the ability to put in explosions, to use nanothermite or thermate, whoever had that access to that. But it also seems that agencies such as NIST have a role to play in the suppression of evidence. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, they certainly have avoided most every attempt on our part to provide missing evidence, obstructed evidence, such as the request for clarification that we made early on, citing what happened with Building 7. Where's the evidence for the destruction of this building? How can you say, for instance, that there were not shear studs connecting the floors to the beams, which allowed the beams to slip sideways, when the shop drawings for the structural steel construction clearly show that there were shear studs. In addition, we're writing a letter to the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce overseeing NIST, where we're demanding that NIST correct their obviously faulty, probably fraudulent report, omitting the stiffeners, the structural steel stiffeners at the ends of the girder, which frames into column 79, which would have prevented the lateral sliding of, well, would have prevented the beam, if it could slide laterally, the girder, if it could slide laterally, would never have fallen off of the column seat on column 79. So we're demanding answers like these, and so there's lots of follow-up with respect to NIST here to do.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking that's going to be an important piece of this, because, architects and engineers and the ReThink 9/11 campaign, I know that you guys don't take a political role in it, that you're just using your knowledge to put the information out to the public and to the media, and to encourage people to step up and call for a new investigation so that we can find out the who, behind all this, the why, and all that important information. But it does seem that we can identify some key players such as NIST, the media, and maybe different elements of this government who are at the very least ignoring information that is being called out. So what are some of the other steps that A&E and the new ReThink 9/11 campaign have been up to in the past couple years? And you just came off of a banner year, I think, of the different campaigns that you guys were pushing out throughout the United States and really around the world. So bring up the audience up to speed on that.
Indeed, September was a huge anniversary for us because we started the campaign ReThink911.org. Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? The evidence might surprise you. The evidence does surprise most because most people are unaware of it, and so we raised $450,000 in September and October to put ads, big banners, in fact billboards, up around 12 different cities around the world, including Sydney and London and Toronto and Vancouver and Ottawa, New York, Boston, San Diego. We have had an enormous impact, we think, on the public unconscious, and forced the media in some cases to cover the issue. Time magazine had a story online. The New York Times at least had to mention this phenomena because in New York we had a 50-foot tall billboard with this message on it. And thousands and thousands of people saw that every day. So we've made some impact, and we continued the effort in Ottawa, where on the buses people saw the ad, and some of them, of course, complained that this was insensitive to the family members. Of course, the family members are the ones that started the 9/11 Truth movement, and many of which are supporting us. And so our response is to go to the city hall and meet with the transportation board, who actually was trying to make efforts to change their policy to keep ads like this from happening. So the effect was we got a whole lot more publicity, and in fact gave the city hall a 10-minute presentation on Building 7, which was the heart of the ad, so that they then became aware of the problem, of the biggest crime of the century, which nobody wants to talk about. So we're making headway. In fact, we'll be in Toronto in March when we have our tour through Canada in a 17-stop tour from the west coast to the east coast of Canada.
17-stop tour, that sounds amazing. What do you guys have specific plans set yet for what you'll be doing in each city?
Yeah, we'll be giving the presentation, laying out all the evidence, starting with Building 7, marching through the evidence for the Twin Towers, talking about why it's so difficult for people to accept this information even when it makes so much rational sense. It's proven, as we touched on earlier. We'll talk about the implications. I mean, why are we looking at 9/11? 9/11 started two major wars after the invasion of two countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, in which millions, at least 2 million people were killed in those countries. Of course, over 6,000 U.S. soldiers, and more are committing suicide every year than died in the wars. It's a complete tragedy all around, no matter how you look at it, and it only benefits those who benefit by war. And so, me being a Reagan Republican, originally supporting these wars, I'm quite embarrassed with my unconscious past, and I'm trying to make amends by sharing with people through these massive efforts, and not just me, of course, our 60 volunteers here at AE 9/11 Truth, and activists all around the world in local action groups, AE 9/11 Truth action groups that are listed on our website, and which people can join and take part in the numerous activities. And it can also support us. We're completely supported by donations and the small sales of our DVDs from our bookstore.
That's awesome. So you guys have also done some recent work with polls in the United States and in Canada. Can you tell us some more about that?
Indeed. YouGov, which is a respected polling company, polled over 1,000 individuals in the U.S. and in Canada, and found that most of them are unaware of the collapse of this third tower on 9/11, Building 7. And when they do see it coming down, most of them suspect, rightfully so, that it's a controlled demolition, that it did not come down according to the official story, which is normal office fires. When we can get that image, that moving image of the Building 7 in front of people and the rest of the evidence, they do tend to agree with us. And that's one of the reasons we're now going to YouTube advertising in a massive campaign, the evolution of ReThink 9/11 ad campaign. We're going to put it in front of people at their computers with their mouse in their hand. When they go to YouTube to watch their video, instead they will see our ad. Many of them, particularly architects and engineers, elected representatives, media representatives, whom we intend to target with this advertising campaign. They will see Building 7 start to come down before that 5-second period when they can skip the ad. And we expect that they'll watch the whole minute-long ad and even click on it to get more information about this startling set of facts that was just put in front of them, interrupting their day. This needs to interrupt all of our days. If 9/11 was some sort of inside operation, and that's what controlled demolition inevitably leads to, then we have some very serious problems in our country that need to be dealt with. We all have to wake up and find out what's going on in this country and turn it around before we get another 9/11. We've lost many of our civil liberties as a result of 9/11 in the guise of protecting us from terrorism. Well, we've given up liberties that were guaranteed to us and fought hard for by our founding fathers and the revolution. We cannot let those slip through our fingers. Many people don't even know that today people can be arrested without being told what without even being charged, without a right to a lawyer or a trial, they can keep us indefinitely in jail. This is absolutely abhorrent in our country, which memorializes freedom from its inception and is a bastion of freedom, or has been, to the world.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's one of the most important questions to ask of this generation, of multiple generations. I want to ask you one more question before I let you go and let you give everyone the web addresses where they can find all your work and the work of ReThink 9/11 Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Recently, Noam Chomsky made a comment in regard to the 9/11 Truth movement. He was asked by radio show host and activist Bob Tuskin why Chomsky doesn't question 9/11. And this is a quote from Chomsky. I'd like your Noam Chomsky, your opinion on this. What you do when you think you've discovered something is write articles in scientific journals, give talks at the professional societies, go to the civil engineering department at MIT or Florida or wherever you are, and present your results. Then proceed to try to convince the national academies, the professional society of physicists and civil engineers, the departments of the major universities, convince them that you've discovered something. there happen to be a lot of people who spend an hour on the internet and think they know a lot of physics. There are reasons there are graduate schools in these departments.
We're talking about 2,100 technical and building professionals with over 35,000 years of collective professional experience laying out evidence which is irrefutable. And all people need to do is look at this evidence. And we have presented it in over 50 universities around the country. So we've done our part. The words that Noam Chomsky is citing is an effort to challenge us to climb through a set of hoops which are highly controlled by the powers that be. In fact, the Defense Department basically owns most of the universities through its extensive grants from the defense industry to these universities, controlling in effect what these tenured and non-tenured professors can and can't say and do. It's very difficult in the universities and the peer-reviewed papers, most of them, to get the attention of these. But we've done that. We've submitted several peer-reviewed papers. In fact, the Journal of Engineering Mechanics has papers. The Journal of 9/11 Studies has peer-reviewed papers. We've done our part. Noam Chomsky will not look at or respond to the actual evidence. He just makes these hand-waving gestures in order to avoid the uncomfortable reality that 9/11 was some sort of an inside operation. That's where the evidence inescapably leads.
The rest of Chomsky's quote was, "You're right that there is a consensus among a minuscule number of architects and engineers. They're not doing what scientists and engineers do when they think they've discovered something." So I'm glad to hear you remark on that, and I'm also glad to hear of the number of papers that you've listed in this interview, and I hope that the listeners and the viewers will go look up those papers themselves, and also next time somebody repeats that remark from Noam Chomsky, you can show them that his statement is fact incorrect. Richard, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Go ahead and let everybody know where they can find more about all the work you guys got coming up.
You bet. Support the ReThink 9/11 campaign, a campaign of AE 9/11 Truth and activists all around the world. ReThink911.org, and support us, our organization, at AE911truth.org. Look at the DVDs and educate yourself and every architect and engineer in your community and everybody else that you can find. You can do this from your own computer, at your own home, on your own time.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Derrick.
That was Richard Gage, AIA, founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and also the ReThink 9/11 campaign. For the Conscious Resistance, this is Derrick Bose signing off. Thank you.